Finding Faith family, here on the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast, where we help you find your faith and find your sleep by letting you know that you are not alone in this journey of life. This is a podcast that is made just for you, real average people, or just for us as well, because we are real average people, as we try to find our faith while still having things that kind of keep us awake at night, while we're trying to work things out in our head, while, social issues are going on all around us. We're trying to figure all this stuff out by having a stance on it from a faith standpoint, from a love standpoint for others. That's what we're trying to do here on this podcast. I'm Wes Easley, one of your hosts at Loafing It over on Twitter, and you can find another host of mine, the producer extraordinaire, I should call you Pierre at this point, of this podcast, Pierre at Pee-wee31 over on Twitter.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little extraordinary. Appreciate it. Yeah, definitely the kind of behind the scenes. We're all a group effort. I just kind of do the tweaks to all the bells and whistles to try to make it sound good.
Yes. And if you got any questions or anything, you can find Pierre not only on that Twitter handle, but also at the Finding Faith Pod. And I think, Michelle, you even get involved in that Finding Faith Pod as well. His wife, Michelle, at GoPackGo411 over on Twitter as well. But that Finding Faith Pod, we want to get that to grow a little bit more so we can get that name out in there a lot more, Michelle.
Yes, we do, Wes. I 100% agree. And I will say really quickly that Go Pack Go handle isn't looking so hot this week, is it?
No. Michelle and I were talking, and Pierre as well, before the show, that this is a big rivalry week between Michelle and I. I'm a big Bears fan. Michelle's a big Packer fan. But, we also said at the end of it all, as we were talking and kind of giving each other a little hard time, just that our life is not built around our football teams. This is just a little sidetrack, a little side note for us here on the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast.
Right, but Pierre was quick to mention that sometimes our attitudes are tied to it, though, which is absolutely true.
I remember that episode, Pierre. I remember that episode. Listen, we've got some listener questions today. We're also going to go over some very controversial topics. I can't believe you put the topics that you put on here on the show notes, but it is very appropriate today. There's different bills being passed and everything in the Senate and stuff like that, and we don't want to get into all those because really our opinions are the ones that count. I know the government has their opinions, and the government can tell us what to do, and the government will allow us to do this, or the government will allow us to do that. And we do have to be obedient to the government, but at the same time, we have to be obedient to God first. And so that's how we should base our decisions, not upon necessarily what the blue side did or what the red side did or what the liberal side. We have to base our decisions on what God asks us to do, and then do our best to make those decisions and carry them out.
Yeah, and like you said, I know they're tough topics, but they're ones that keep us awake. They're ones that we think about, we discuss, that we have conversations on, or something that we maybe even stay silent on as well. So, we have to tackle those too. We can't just take the easy route. And I felt like it was a good opportunity to have some of these conversations.
And speaking of conversations, in our last conversation about the Ten Commandments, we had 10 Commandments, and we always want to encourage people, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or something a topic that you would like for us to cover, you can get it over there at the Finding Faith Pod on Twitter. And also you can email us at thefindingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com. And you can let us know any kind of, any topics that you'd like for us to talk about. And we actually had a listener question, I think, Pierre, you said, and I also had one as well, a kind of a comment, I guess. So we got two of them today, Pierre.
We do. So the first one kind of tied into our episode 3 for prayer. And the questions was, how do you handle situations where you feel like your prayers are being answered, but they don't necessarily align with your spouse's prayers? Cool. And that's a tough one to kind of gauge. I know Michelle and I have similar situations. So even here, like recently, like not with prayer per se, but she's a snow girl, and I'm not a big fan of the snow at all. And we were kind of trying to make some holiday plans, and oftentimes we go to warm weather. That's where I like to be. That's where her parents like to be. So we tend to go to warm weather, especially for winter break. And I realize this, and I'm willing to, what I feel is the key word in this, and that's sacrifice. I'm willing to make some sacrifices to get her, some snow on Christmas, but even so, it's not guaranteed to snow. I just want to point that out, but that's what it comes down to. I think is you got to look at being able to sacrifice, especially if it's only been one side that's been sacrificed, and in one cultural scenario right now that's kind of in the media is with Giselle and Tom Brady. So not sure if you've seen, but she recently, came out and, said she would like him to be more available and has kind of spoken to all the things she sacrificed in her career for their kids, for him to have the career that he has. And it would be nice for her to now have a chance to kind of pursue some of the things she wants to pursue. Because, he's had all these Super Bowls. He retired for 2 months, then he came back to the NFL. And I think that's the mentality that you'll end up running into if it's only one-sided. You have to be able to sacrifice for each other and realize, if you've been having prayers answered, that's great. If they don't align with your spouse, you got to have those communications to make sure that you're working it out together and that there aren't maybe, things that they want to pursue that could be different from you. And if so, then it might be your time to sacrifice. If it's been one-sided throughout the process, would be my answer to that.
Okay.
And I
now
agree.
We get to see the other side of the story now. Okay, let's go.
I started to interject. I'm sure you heard, but when he said, often I'm like, always maybe we go warm, but I also understand that we do have cold weather here. I don't personally believe it's as often as Pierre thinks it is as far as snow goes in Indiana, but not like it used to be. But I am usually the one who does sacrifice with cold weather things. It's not necessarily that I love cold weather. It's just that I absolutely love how snow looks. And I'm not saying I want to be out in it necessarily. I don't need to go snowmobiling and skiing and all of that. I just want to sit in a warm cabin by a fire, maybe reading a book and looking at the snow falling. But I am in the vast minority in my family. And so it only makes sense typically to go somewhere warm because I do also enjoy those places. And so it's not like I'm really, quote unquote, sacrificing when we go to those places because, who doesn't love the beach and the sand, right? So I don't love extreme heat. I am not a fan of that either. So I'm kind of, that median, vanilla girl, I suppose. But, but I do appreciate the fact that Pierre has been looking at places for Christmas for me, and I appreciate his mentality on that. So.
Well, I thank you guys for opening up on this Finding Faith and Supporting Marriage podcast here. But look, that is the way you do it. I think you got in a marriage, you got to work together a little bit, and it's tough sometimes whenever you have two people in a relationship that are married, and maybe one of them becomes a Christian and one of them is not, right? And so maybe this is what the question was about a little bit more so than just two Christians trying to work things out, and it could be, and that's a different situation because just like I said earlier, our first obedience always comes to God over our spouse, over our government, over those things. We want to be in subjection to those other things, but we are in subjection to God and Christ first, right? So that's how that's how it kind of the ladder goes a little bit. Now, when it goes in. Go ahead,
Sorry,
Michelle.
Wes, go ahead. No, go ahead. I'll ask after you're done.
Okay. And so then, whenever you think about maybe a spouse who doesn't want their wife or their husband to go to church, I'll use the husband. Husbands are usually those people that are like, I ain't going to church. I'm going doing something else, at least that's how they talk down here. And so the wife goes to church, but maybe their prayers are that they want to go as a family. And maybe the husband's prayer is like, man, I wish she'd go fishing with me, that kind of thing. And, whether or not church attendance is one of those things, I'll let you guys kind of decide that. I'm just using it as an example. So maybe the husband is like, I don't want her to go to church. I want her to go fishing. And if I break her car down, then she'll have to get in my pickup truck and then we'll just go on fishing. We won't go to church, that kind of thing. And so maybe he takes the spark plug wires out or something like that. Maybe the car doesn't start. Well, the wife.
Ooh, that's
the
getting
wife.
deep.
That is like sabotage here. What's going on?
No, it could be. It could be. You never know. And then maybe the husband is thinking that he's got it all worked out, but the wife is still in subject to Christ and subject to God. So she finds a different way to church. She calls Uber and goes to church that way. Maybe that helps influence the husband a little bit more to be a little bit more spiritual. But when it comes to different things, the rule of thumb is this. In Ephesians, it tells us that wives be in subjection to your husbands, right? Just like you are in subject to God. And then it also goes on to tell us that men are the head of the family, or men is the head of the wife, just as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and it is himself a savior. As the church is subject to Christ, so let wives also be subject to everything. And their husband love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So I think that's the commandment for husbands. Husbands, we're not lording this over our wife. Hey, man, get in there and do the dishes. You know, we aren't like that. We're looking for ways and opportunities to be able to help them throughout life, and we understand their plight in life, and we do things for them out of love and out of respect and out of honor, just like Christ gave himself up for the church. A husband shouldn't want his wife's car break down so she can't go to church. He should be trying to figure out ways to help support her in those kind of decisions, because, you know, that's what a husband should be doing, right? And Christ gave up his life for the church, so husbands should give up their life to their wives. And honestly, I don't know which one's tougher to do, to be subject, because I'm not a wife, but for a wife to be subject to their husband, or for a husband to lose his life for his wife. You know, I don't know. It's a yin and a yang thing probably in that kind of conversation.
So I think that's where some of the subjectivity comes in, Wes, like where you were saying like in this scenario, the husband's the non-believer, the wife is the believer. She wants to go to church. You're supposed to, be subjective to your husband. So does that mean she shouldn't go to church? No, because we should always follow what is right by God. So I think here what would happen is if the two are separate, right? Like he doesn't believe she should go to church. She believes she should. I think this is where the prayer just needs to continue on her part for him. And she continues to do what is right and pray that she's planted enough seed that God can then, work and grow in his heart, and eventually he'll join her. Obviously that doesn't always work. That is not always the case, but it does happen and it can happen. And I think that's where you stay steadfast in prayer and leave the rest up to God.
I agree.
I think the other thing mutually is also, so which option leads you closer
right
to God and which one leads you further apart. So if you have two separate thought processes, two separate prayers, even, is there one that's going to pull you further from God, whether it be distance, location, what it actually is, like maybe the meat and potatoes of it all, or is it going to be something that you're going to get closer to God, you're going to be closer to a church or closer to relatives or family that attend, something along those lines? Like whatever answer is gearing you closer to God is usually the answer you want to follow. Probably always the answer you want to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And I like the prayer part. I like what you said as well, Pierre. And I think it's just maybe in that respect, whatever it is, if people can't see eye to eye on that kind of stuff, you just keep on doing the right things. And hopefully, prayerfully, that ends up winning somebody over to doing right things as well, if they happen to be doing the wrong things, not accusing anybody of anything. But I think that's the best way to do it, just like in all aspects of life. All right. So that's that question. I got another comment here from a listener, Pierre.
Okay.
All right. Dear Finding Faith podcast, Wes is so good at doing this. I think you should give Wes a little bit more airtime. I love what Michelle has to say, and also Pierre, but man, that Wes just makes me laugh and giggle a lot. Signed, Mom. No. I'm just kidding. I'm joking. But it's good to have those kind of questions. I encourage everybody to leave a comment, leave a question, give it a 5-star slap there on whatever listening platform you like to listen to the podcast on. We do appreciate those kind of comments. And if you want us to cover any kind of specific topic, by all means, let us know. You can get in touch with us at findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com or at Finding Faith Pod over there on Twitter. Okay, now you got another little, as I follow the outline, the show outline, Pierre. This is where it starts getting a little, I want to say drippy, I guess. I don't know. Drippy is, I mean, it's, it's got some swag. I don't know what this is, but yeah. Well, it's a lot of big topics is what you have here. And coming off our commandments episode of thou shalt not murder, you put down here, does that include suicide? And so now I guess we got to talk about that. And then a little bit later, you have another question, a pro-life abortion as well, so, or compared to abortion. So, boy, those are two big topics, Pierre. Those are two big ones. I'm not sure how you want to tackle them. I know how I'm going to go about it, but I'm going to give you the chance to go first there, Buddy Rowe.
Yeah, so we're talking context here, and I think one of the big question marks, one of the low-hanging fruit with those that are Christians, with Christianity, those that aren't, those that maybe are atheists, is kind of the context of the Bible itself. And I think some things can maybe get lost in translation. I think we sometimes put our own thoughts into the process as well. But I think that's where a lot of the struggle comes from, is what does the context mean? And, we don't necessarily go back into the translation and, figure out what the Hebrew word was for this or that. But these are kind of questions that come up. These are things that linger. And so with a big one, and this has come up in a men's life group that I have, is, with suicides, you're technically murdering yourself. Does that fall under the same thou shalt not murder bucket? And I don't know. These are topics that, keep us awake at night, but it was a question that was posed. And do I personally feel like if I make it to heaven, I'm going to see some folks that have committed suicide there? I do. I think that's where the context kind of comes into play. So is a suicide considered a murder? You can say, yeah, you're technically, murdering yourself. So I don't know that answer.
Yes.
But these are conversations I feel like we should be having and kind of discussing. So any thoughts on that from either of you?
Michelle?
I think this one in particular is difficult. And quite honestly, I don't know that we're going to have the answer. I think that personally, it's something that I've gone over and over. I've talked to people who have lost loved ones to suicide. I have talked to friends who have been on the suicidal side and feeling those feelings and really struggling with them. And I think ultimately sometimes what I've heard keeps them from doing that is knowing that they want to go to heaven and they believe it's wrong. So I think ultimately for me, I honestly think it comes down to what you believe. Because you're the only one who's going to be in front of God at the end. And, he's going to decide. It's not up to us so much to figure it out. But man, that's a tough one because, I don't know.
No,
well, it's tough. You think about someone that actually commits murder.
Right.
If they don't do it to themselves, they still have the chance to repent, come to the Lord, admit their sins, their sorrows. Whereas if you do it to yourself, that opportunity is gone.
Mm-hmm.
But what was worse, is kind of where I kind of sit. So was the serial killer, just as an example, worse than the one person who maybe society let down and they just were over it? So those are the thoughts. And that's where I think it kind of gets lost. And Michelle makes a good point. It's probably not something for us to think about because it's not going to be up to us at the end anyways. It's going to be up to our maker and, judgment day. So that's a good way of thinking about it, looking at it. But we kind of talked about chances, with the lottery. If something like that's going to lower my chances, I'd probably rather not take the chance of doing it.
Well, and ultimately, right? Like Pierre said, it's it's not up to us, but, he said, is one worse than the other? But I'm not sure that there's a gauge. It just is. Like, the person is still gone. And I think he's right as far as the part where he said, if you do commit suicide, you don't have that chance to repent. The murderer still has that opportunity. And so I don't know. And I think that's why these are hot topics and often hotly contested and that sort of thing. But again, I go back to ultimately, it's not up to us to decide. So I don't know.
Well, we're here to try and help decide those things.
Exactly.
I think you guys said it. I think you did say something, right? We're just talking about this stuff, right? And I agree with you. We're not sitting in the judgment seat of God. So that's the bottom line. That's the top of the ladder right there. I think there's going to be many things that we might get surprised about whenever we get to heaven, right? As a believer and a follower of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, we'll be like, oh, really? I'm sorry. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to. I didn't know. I would have tried harder, or something like that. So, and I think that this is a topic where you're right. This might fall into that category where, thankfully, I'm not in that judgment seat of God. And how do we know clearly what is going to be done? I think about innocence, and the age of accountability is a conversation, is a topic that gets talked about of when a child or a person, a human being, should be baptized, right? There's some traditions where a baby gets baptized, right? Because they're born into this world and the world is sinful. So the baby has to get baptized to wash away the sins of the world or their parents or the child's sins that they inherit, the inherited sins. Maybe then there's another one where they're 8 or 9 years old and they want to be baptized and to turn their life over and their dedication to God right there at that spot. Now, I've always thought, that's a little young. Me personally, I've always thought, because I remember being 8 or 9 years old. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing when I was 18 years old, right? But 8 or 9 years old, my daughter got invited to go to one of the vacation Bible schools when she was little. And vacation Bible schools down here in the South may be different than they are up there in the Midwest, Pierre. But down here in the South, like, every kid is like, their story is, I went to a vacation Bible school and I got baptized. I got saved at a vacation Bible school when I was 4 years old, that kind of thing. And I'm going, how do you really know that you did that? I don't say that to the person, but that's in their testimony as they're getting baptized as an adult. Because they say they really didn't know what they were doing back then. And then they, have lived life and they've made some bad decisions and now they're rededicating their life, but they feel like they're dedicating their life for the first time. So my daughter got invited to a vacation Bible school. I said, yes, she can go as long as she doesn't get saved. And I didn't mean that in that way, but I didn't want her to walk the aisle. I didn't want her to get baptized. I wanted her to make that decision on her own one day.
But I think that's a case by case basis. Cause at our church, we see kids get baptized all the time, and some of their testimonies, you're like, whoa, like they do get it. They do understand what they're doing, what it's about. And so I wouldn't necessarily say no. It's your child, you can do what you want. But for me, I wouldn't say no. I more want to know the context.
Why?
As we're talking, the why, the terms of it. Why do you want to get saved? And if they get it, they understand it's, it's for their sins, it's for salvations, which some kids do. Have at it. I am happy for you. I'm proud of you.
Yep.
If it's, my parents said this or, something, then no, yeah, let's wait. Let's wait till you kind of maybe understand what you're doing a bit more. But that choice in those questions should be, posed to those children.
Sure. And during if she would have came home and she would have been all, excited about doing it and wanting to do it. And like you said, if all the boxes got checked, then who am I going to stand? I'm not going to stand in the way. But it was just one of those things where I wanted to make sure the parent knew that, hey, let's not pressure her into doing this. OK, this has got to be her decision. Right. And so I think that comes down to that age of innocence or that, age of accountability kind of a thing. And what is that age? And when I thought about my daughter, I was wondering as I watched her, because it was my first kid and everything. And I'm going, well, I think back to Adam and Eve, their innocence got taken away whenever they ate the tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, like we had talked about before. And then all of a sudden they realized they were naked. Right. And so I'm like, okay, maybe the age of accountability is when my daughter realizes she's naked in front of me. I don't know, or in front of people. I don't know when the age of accountability is. I know Jesus, he was 13 years old and sitting in the temple, and we don't hear a lot about him being a kid, and we don't hear a lot about him in his teenage years. And then we see him starting his public ministry at 30 years of age and getting baptized by John the Baptist, and then living for 3 years and then getting crucified and all that stuff. So I don't know when that age of accountability is. But my point is this. There's innocence somewhere along the way that gets lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's choices and decisions that are made by the person to do right or to do wrong. And that's why I was watching my daughter. I'm going, okay, when is this age of accountability thing going to take effect? You know, when do I because I was feeling pressure as a dad to do the right things and everything. And I think about somebody who commits suicide. I think about somebody who might be born with, mental retardation or anything like that, and they don't really know what's going on. They don't know. They don't know, the decisions that are making. They can't really decipher right from wrong. Let's say that person does wrong and they pass away, they die. Are they going to hell? And then I think about the person who commits suicide. I had a very close family member who committed suicide. Shocked my world, rocked my world, man. When I heard that news, it was my mother in the Lord, very close to me, and when I heard that, it was the first time I had heard that she was battling depression for a long time as well. Her husband kind of kept that from the family a little bit because he didn't want us to worry. Mm-hmm. And I know that woman, right? I know that woman's laugh. I know how that woman loved to have fun. I know how that woman treated me. But I can't imagine what that woman was going through at that time. I'm going to back it up one day before I heard that news. Okay. We were at a ball field and we were watching her nephew play t-ball. And it was about to come raining really hard, just a gully washer or whatever you want to call it. And I asked her, I said, do you want me to go get the car for you and pull it up here so you don't go out in the rain? Because, thunder, you hear the thunder, it's going to rain. And she said, Wesley, it really doesn't matter. And I am dumb. Okay, I am dumb. And I didn't know that she was struggling with some things like that. And I said, okay, well, be careful. And I left. The next morning, I got the phone call. And I thought back at some point to that conversation. And then I remember seeing the look in her eyes. And I said, oh, my. I wish I would have known. I kicked myself a little bit for not knowing, but I didn't know. I was innocent in all of it. Mm-hmm. But the look in her eyes, I know that that's not the same person that was my mother in the Lord. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like there was something going on there underlying where she couldn't make rational decisions. She couldn't make rational thoughts. Maybe this is me rationalizing everything, but really, honestly, I've thought about this. And for her not to let me go get the car was it was a little weird, but at the same time, maybe I thought maybe she wants to walk in the rain. I don't know. I didn't know. And I just think that innocence part, we're not sitting in the seat of God. We can't see somebody's heart. We can't see somebody's mind. We don't know what they're going through all the time. So when I think about somebody who maybe has committed suicide, or maybe somebody who can't make rational decisions back and forth, and they're just not realizing the consequences of their sins or their actions, that's where I go, okay, there's a pass in my world. If I was sitting in the seat of God, I would say, okay, that person can't make rational decisions. Then they can't be held accountable to that. That's how I see it. I know I don't sit in the seat of God or anything like that, but that's how I've kind of made sense of it in my head a little bit, and I think that makes a little bit of sense. So that's how I look at it: is that person innocent? Is that person making good rational decisions? Are they doing something on purpose, or is there something in some kind of instability for that? And listen, even like even that person that close to the family of my mother and Lord, her medication had just changed recently. So, there was some stuff going on that nobody knew about inside of her mind, not until it was all said and done. And then we could all see clearly in hindsight.
Right. And I believe, oftentimes that alters the decision making and those sorts of things. And I agree with you, Wes. I think that, we just never know what's going on. And you even look at Robin Williams, like somebody who is joyful and happy to the world, right? Like brings joy and laughter. And like you said about her, like just good. And then all of a sudden gone. And, we never know what's going on in someone else's world. And I think that's why it's so important. You can't know what's going on with someone just by looking at them. Oftentimes, there's so many silent things, and there's so many things that people hide from the world out of many different reasons, shame, fear, whatever it might be. And that's why God calls us to love each other and to love on one another regardless. So, I'm so sorry for your loss, and
I appreciate
it's incredibly sad.
Yeah, but so what you just did is you added context to her situation. And going into this next subject with the pro-life abortion, I'm pro-life. I find myself pro-life, but I also find myself pro-choice at times. And the reason I say that is I think there's context to everything. With this particular subject, we just talked about the innocence of kids, and I'm not sure if you have heard this story, but there's a 10-year-old in Ohio, actually, who was raped. And no one wanted to do the surgery, the abortion for this 10-year-old who was raped. And she actually came to Indiana, and there was a doctor here that performed the surgery, for that 10-year-old to not have to go through that situation. And I think that's one of those scenarios for me that I was fine with the pro-choice route. I don't know if that's right. I don't know if that's wrong, but my daughter's 10, for example. Lord forbid if something like that happened, I wouldn't want her to have to be forced to go through with pregnancy and all that type of situations and potentially risk even losing her because of an act that some evil person committed.
Right.
And so with me, I feel like there's context in that situation. It's not just black and white like some try to make it out to be. When you speak pro-life, it's pro-life for everything. It's pro-life for the 10-year-old. It's pro-life for the baby. Same goes with adults. If there's a situation where the mom could lose their life, great. I'm glad that baby came into the world. But you know what happened to that doctor that did that surgery?
I am going to suspect that he was murdered.
No, so it was a she.
Oh,
she got death threats.
Okay.
So you're speaking pro-life and how you're pro-life. She does something for a 10-year-old and gets death threats. So where's the pro-life for the doctor now? Yeah. And that's where I kind of get upset. I'm sure you can tell how my voice kind of changed, but you have to be pro-life for everyone. There's kids in an orphanage that you have to be pro-life for. There's adults that you have to be pro-life for that are on the streets, etc. It can't just be at a certain stage that you're pro-life. If you're pro-life, you're pro-human in general. Right. And with that, there's context to the situation. Now, if you're, like you said, right or wrong, you commit an act that maybe you shouldn't be doing, there's consequences to that. But in addition to that, I think there's context to every situation where it's not just a black and white pro-life versus pro-choice.
I agree. I think that there is. And that's what makes all these decisions and these things that we're talking about, that's what makes them difficult, right? Because there are a lot of different scenarios. And is there a black and white thing? Well, I know there is for me in some cases, right? But there isn't always necessarily that same thing. Man, there's so many things that as you get older, you start going, I never thought about that side of the coin. I've never thought about that. I have some political friends who are politicians. I got a senator friend. I got somebody who's who's a district attorney. I got somebody who's a councilman, and I always think, man, y'all's job is hard, because you got there's so many people that you're trying to make happy in all of this, and I don't know that you can make anybody happy, and so they have to make a decision that is good for everybody as a whole, not just for one group of people. And that is tough to do, man, because there is context to everything.
It's so true. And I know Pierre said, he's pro-life. I am too. I also lean toward, I can understand the pro-choice part of it. I have, like you said, it's not black and white. There's gray area. And I firmly believe that God is in that gray area. It's not up to us to decide in that black and white. It's not up to the government, honestly, I believe, to decide what's right and wrong for a woman's body. Like Pierre said, heaven forbid something like that happened to Olivia. I can't imagine that I would not want to do the same thing that poor child did, and the scars that would cause. And so, my heart is living in that gray area on that topic. And so, I know there are scenarios, I get it. And I don't think it's for me to decide. I can have my own beliefs, and everyone's entitled to their beliefs. That's the thing. Like, it's not, I don't like it when the government gets to decide for us. And I think, or the political side of it, I have difficulty with. I've always said, how can we be a United States when we are so torn with division on purpose? Like, we have parties on purpose. And I know that's supposed to be for fairness, but man, like, how are we United States? We're not. Right. We're divided states. And that's the problem.
It is at times. You guys remember a podcast or 2 or 10 or however long we've been doing this? And I told you guys that I could tell you a million stories. And look, we plan these show notes a little bit, but we don't like necessarily try and cover everything. And I told you guys that you're going to probably think I'm lying sometimes whenever we're talking about stuff, because I got a story for everything. And it's very personal, it seems like. And I told you that I've been through a lot of stuff, personally, and that I'm an anomaly, and I'm sitting here, and I don't know why I'm sitting here. It's the grace of God that put me in these places to be able to talk about things like this. So this topic even hits very close home to me, because before I was a Christian, several years ago, and you guys know how I was raised now a little bit, and I didn't really have a lot of accountability. I didn't have a lot of things. There's plenty of stories for that as well. Things that I think time has passed long enough to where I won't go to jail for. But I was young. I was a young man, and I didn't think real hard, guys. I didn't think real hard. And the option was there for me to have an abortion. Not me personally, but a young lady that And so we made that choice together. But I mean, honestly, the option was there, and I didn't even think about it. I thought that option, I never thought about it at all. I thought the option was just as clear as day as walking through a door. That's it. I was going to the doctor. She was going to the doctor. I went there with her, paid for all that stuff. But I'd never thought about the accountability, the retribution, the sinfulness. I didn't, because I was not even close to being a Christian. The sex talk that I got growing up as a kid was, hey, if you need any condoms, let me know. I didn't listen to that advice either, I guess. But I was responsible for that. Now, many years passed, and I became a Christian, and I started trying to think of things. And, as I confessed my sins to God over a period of time, like, oh, man, I did that. Sorry about that, Lord. I apologize. And I knew I was cleansed and all that stuff. I was washed by the water, all those things. But that is something that it kept me up at night. All right? Because I didn't understand it whenever it happened. And I can remember being, we had 2 acres of land here, whenever we moved into a house, and I'd be out there mowing, and I would start crying out there, because when you're alone with your thoughts, before we had headsets and music and everything, I'm just sitting there on a mower, bouncing around for a couple hours trying to get all this yard mowed. And I'd be out there alone, and that thought would cross my mind of my responsibility and all that, and that I had killed somebody. I was responsible for it. And man, I'd start crying out there all by myself. And that one took a long time for me to get over. And I'm not even going to say that I'm over it now, because I still feel responsibility. I look forward because of what David says there after his young child had passed away that he had with Bathsheba in an unhealthy relationship that he had with Bathsheba. And he said, that the child, he mourned for the child, and then he moved on. And they're like, "How come you're not mourning still?" He said, "Because I'm looking forward to seeing that baby in heaven." And that's what I'm looking forward to as well. I look forward to that day one day. And I can't personally condone that in any kind of situation. I understand there are situations that would arise to where you would really have to consider it. And I'm not going to judge anybody if I'm not walking in their shoes.
Right.
Properly. It's really hard to do that.
I think that's what it comes down to, us, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. But see, we're talking tough things on the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast, huh?
That's the thought process I think we have to have. Like we always preach as Christians, the Lord giving us free will, and that's part of it. And I think about what if other things, laws were put into place that stop your free will that the Lord's given you. I know one big topic obviously is divorce. It's obviously high, these days in America, et cetera. But what if the law was passed where you couldn't get a divorce, for example? Not that you should be, but let's just say that was the case. You're again taking away free will from folks. But what if someone made a mistake? Sometimes you're in a marriage and you realize there were signs leading up to that point where you probably shouldn't have been in the marriage in the first place. Now you're in that marriage. What if there's a law in place that says you can't get out of it? We can speak to those things as well. And so that's kind of the thought process I think about when you think about the whole pro-life situation. Again, there's context to everything. If something's unique, I'm not saying that, the whole thing, Roe versus Wade, I'm not saying it has to be overturned, except all that doesn't matter. There should be certain situations that we're protected from or protected for, depending on the context and the scenario, because everything, again, isn't cut and dry.
And it's not even going to matter about the governmental laws. People will find a way to do things.
Oh,
there was a law in the Old Testament that if a husband thought his wife was cheating on him, he could take her to the priest, and this is the specific thing. There wasn't for a man cheating on his wife. It was a woman cheating, and it wasn't. He thought, hey, that ain't my baby. He could take her to the priest. The priest does some weird ceremonial thing, takes her hair, takes the dust off the floor of the temple, puts it in the bottle, fills the bottle up with either wine or water. I can't remember which one. Mixes it up, has her take a vow, gives her this whole long spiel about stuff. And then she's supposed to drink it. And if that concoction caused her to have a miscarriage, then she was guilty, right? Or if it didn't, then it was not. She wasn't guilty. So there's these weird things. People are going to find ways. People are going to do things, regardless of whatever the law is that the government passes, to find out what they want to do. I mean, it didn't take alcohol being passed as a law that everybody could have it for everybody to be drinking. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't work that way.
I agree, but so the context as a Christian, I feel, is just to kind of love through it, and that kind of ties into the last topic I kind of want to cover. So, I was recently at a men's conference, and there was a speaker named Adrian Dupre, and he talked about a 4-chair concept, and you can find it. It's pretty popular, but it's pretty much the 4 chairs of Christianity, spirituality, whatever you want to say. And the 4th chair, you're lost, lost soul, atheist, however you want to put it, you're lost. The 3rd chair, you're seeking. There's something missing, there's something missing, you're not sure what's missing. The 2nd chair, you're going to church, you believe in God, you're serving. But that 2nd chair is, the Bible says that some get into heaven by the skin of their teeth. That 2nd chair is where those people are. Then the 1st chair is the small percentage that are serving, that are leading folks to the Lord, making disciples of disciples. And a bunch of men in a room, and we kind of had to decide what chair that we were in. And a lot of people are in chair 2 and 3 and don't realize it. And what I mean by that is, even those that are in church, like this is a room full of men that go to church all the time. But once you kind of identified what each chair meant, the majority of the room came up in 2 and 3 for the chairs, which means some are seeking still and some were serving, but just by the skin of their teeth. And the issue with that is that the folks in the 2 and 3 chairs are keeping the folks in the 4th chair in the 4th chair. The folks that are lost, the ones that we need to reach, when they start to get curious and pique that curiosity, they know who that 1st chair person is. They know who's over the top, in love with Jesus, in love with God. They intentionally avoid that person. They feel more comfortable with chairs 2 and 3. And the issue happens is those chairs aren't dove in, and they often do more harm than good, based off their behaviors, based off what they speak to, whether it be some of these, topics that we're talking to, and they turn off that chair 4 to where that 4th chair stays in the 4th chair. And part of the reason why I thought it was good to have these conversations is to know, there are Christians out there that just love. You know what I mean? Like there's sins all over. We all are sinful people. No sin, as it says, is greater than the other. Christians know this, but what I don't think we know quite as well is what chair we're in. So I really wanted to touch on that because I hope that all of us, all those that are listening, if you feel like you're in chair 1, that you make sure you're in chair 1. You make sure you're making disciples of disciples. You're being a good example for those in chair 2, for those in chair 3, and for those in chair 4, because some of your statements, some of your comments, some of your assumptions, your judgments are keeping people away from Jesus.
I think sometimes it's maybe musical chairs. I think that, maybe people go back and forth a little bit here and there, as far as like what season you're in. You might have times where you're just really good and then you fall back. And so maybe you go from chair 2 to chair 1 for a little while and then back to chair 2. But I do agree with you about, I've said before that when I take our daughter Olivia to school, her thing all of a sudden is she wants to listen to the new Torrin Wells CD. So every morning, that's what we listen to. And there's one song on there, actually a couple of them, but one of them is called Come Home. And in the lyric of Come Home, it says, the perpetrators of division are the casualties in the name of religion. So you think that you'd be safer from a distance. And I won't say that's not true. I know you've seen a sin of hypocrisy. That's the human condition. That's not God's heartbeat. And it says, I'm sorry. And so I think what he's saying there is that we as humans and as, those of us who are in the church, that religion oftentimes we are the people that are causing the casualties because they're seeing us be hypocritical. They're seeing the sin of hypocrisy. And that's human. That's the human condition. That's not God's heartbeat. That's not what God intended for us to do. He intended for us to love one another and show each other. So, it really stuck out to me. And when Pierre said something about wanting to do this, I was like, oh my goodness, I just heard that on the way to taking Olivia to school this morning. And I said, it just stuck out all of a sudden. And then I come home and you say this to me. And so I figured it was important to share. And I think if we can, maybe on the next episode or something like that, I would like to go a little deeper into another one of those. But so that's that on that one.
Yeah, the 4 chair thing, I've heard that before. And yeah, it's tough to know which chair you're in sometimes. Mm-hmm. And you could be over the top on chair number 1 for sure. I'm going to be honest with you. as long as people aren't turning people off, I need those really holy people, right? Not those people sitting there pointing their fingers and telling everybody they're going to hell. I don't need those people necessarily, but I do need to be put in place sometimes, maybe. Okay. But I need those people who I'm striving to be like. One of the qualifications for being an elder, I think that'd make a great show, by the way, one day, to do those qualifications of what it is to become an elder or a deacon in the church, is that you desire that office, right? And that word, when you do go back out to the Greek, it's I equate it to being like holding a lollipop too high for a kid, and they're reaching up really high for it because they want that lollipop so bad, and they're striving to get it, right? I think that too many times we cut ourselves off, or we count ourselves short, or we just don't think we'll ever be able to get good enough. We just won't ever be good enough. And so we're like, we don't have to try. So I need those people in chair number one sometimes, because I gotta be checked every once in a while, because I might be too lazy of a Christian. And I could completely understand chair number 4 pointing at chair number 1 going, hey, that's not because they're too good, but because chair number 1 is pointing at them, telling them that they're going to hell. To completely different of trying to live a righteous and holy life and and instead of telling everybody that they aren't. There's a complete difference in those two kind of things. So yeah,
and I'm sure it's overwhelming.
Yeah, it can be.
But you talked about the little kid reaching the lollipop and just the energy and the passion. And you look at passion. We kind of talked about passion. And you have definition of passion, strong and barely controllable emotion. And the one that I think people lose is suffering. When you think passion, you don't think suffering, but that's actually under the definition of passion, where you want something so much that you're willing to suffer for it. And that's actually where the passion of the Christ, kind of stems from. He suffered on the cross so much for us and our sins, and that's what it means to be in chair 1. You're willing to suffer in order to bring others from chairs 2 through 4 to chair 1. And that's the mindset we have to get in. That's the mindset I hope people can start to think about. When you're out in public, when you're at church, when you're broadcasting yourself as a Christian, folks are watching because they're curious. They want something more. Don't be the person that turns them away because of your behavior. Be the person that draws them near, that piques that interest for your passion that you have for the Lord.
Yeah, and that hypocrisy of not doing things right, and the hypocrisy of condemning everybody. 2 totally different things. Yes,
and that's the thing. I mean, honestly, we're all hypocrites. I mean, it's just true. I mean, in some way, shape, or form, we don't always 100% of the time practice what we preach. I mean, we're not sitting here in judgment of others. I mean, we're guilty of it too. It's just going to be the human condition, and something that we have to continually strive for.
Yes, totally. Hey, that's a big, long podcast. Really tough topics, but I appreciate both of you sharing, though, and being open and honest. Because honestly, the front part of the show, when I said that this is a regular podcast built for people so that they don't feel like they're alone, I think about what my good friend over on Twitter, at my Mad Scientist on Twitter, I don't know what his name, I can't remember his name right now, but he said it's okay to cry. It's okay to... Boy, hold on. It's okay to cry. It's okay to walk away from situations, and it's okay to not be okay. And sometimes I think we all do those little things where we feel like we're not okay, but I want you to know that you're not alone. And these thoughts of not having answers to this stuff, it doesn't stop me from being a Christian. Clear-cut answers. Let me redefine that. It doesn't stop me from being a Christian. It doesn't stop me from trying. It doesn't stop me from sharing the gospel. It doesn't stop me from living a life that would be honorable and respectable. It doesn't stop me from trying to persuade others to do the same things. Okay, it doesn't. Even though I don't know that I have all the answers, I feel comfortable enough that I have some of them. And so I'm going to try and do my best I can with those answers that I have. And Pierre and Michelle, I personally want to thank you both for dragging me onto this podcast. I say dragging, it's getting me on here each and every time and allowing me to be able to share my life with others.
And thank you, Wes, for all of the things that you share and for, being willing to be vulnerable and go deep and to, just kind of expose, your hurts and your past. And we really appreciate that. I mean, you're such a great, real person. And, we just appreciate you so much.
Past is the past.
Thank you to you both for being willing to do this, to have these conversations. Thanks to the listeners for tuning in, listening to us, giving us feedback, giving us questions, and kind of going along on this journey with us.
This is the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast. You can find it over on Twitter at Finding Faith Pod. You can find me on Twitter at Lofinit. You can find Pierre at Peewee31. I don't know where you can find Michelle this week because the Bears are playing the Packers. No, you can find
Pack, go 411.
Go Pack, go 411. Hey, make sure if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can send us an email as well. findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com. Also, you can leave a comment, and that always helps out at getting the podcast out there and everything. But really, we want to hear you guys either correct us where we're wrong or tell us where we're right or appreciate us. Tell us thank you for sharing our stories and everything like that. That's always an encouraging thing. And we've had good reviews. We've had good comments and stuff like that. So we appreciate all those listeners doing that. And we always want to encourage every single one of you out there to keep trying to find your faith and not losing sleep.